I have used the Adobe Creative Cloud app to go ahead and install Premiere Pro on my machine. I would assume that you guys already have your Adobe Creative Cloud username and password, so you're able to do this sort of thing. If you don't have Premiere Pro already installed, you can just go to the Creative Cloud desktop app, and then you have options to install Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, After Effects, all the apps that are bundled in the Creative Cloud. You can then install them. You'll see a button here that says install. A little bit of an extra thing in the Creative Cloud desktop app. If you click the little 3-dot icon here, the ellipsis, you should see a couple other things. You could uninstall the program, or you could look at other versions. And this does come in handy from time to time if, say, Adobe Premiere Pro or Adobe puts out Premiere Pro version 15, and you've been working in 14 for a while, and 15 somehow messes up your computer, or you're unable to run it for one reason or another. You can always jump back a few versions. So I can even see like the last version of 13 here if 14 hadn't worked for me. So if you had any issues with future installs or anything like that, you can always jump back there. I am going to launch the program, and I'm going to launch the program. Oh, it's already launched here. I'm just going to close out of it. Okay. Now, when I launch the program, if I just search for Premiere, there is Adobe Premiere 2020 on my Windows machine. You can, if you use Mac, you might have a slightly different thing. If I'm on a Windows machine, I can hold an Alt and click my my Premiere, and it's going to actually give me this little dialog box that says, are you sure you want to reset your preferences? Since I've worked in Premiere for years on this machine already, I have all sorts of weird preferences and workspaces that I've built up, and I can press OK here, and it's going to revert all back to the original Adobe Premiere. So if you've been working in Premiere for a little while and you need to reset your stuff so you're seeing what I'm seeing, go ahead and do that. Hold an Alt and then open it, and you'll get this dialog box too. And if you have a brand new fresh version of Premiere, you are totally set. It's going to look the same as mine. Okay, now the program's loaded up for me, and I get this landing page here. This is what you see when you first load up the program. And here, this thing right now has nothing in it, but you see add effects and export. Where this thing is currently, that's where all of your video projects, everything that you work on in Premiere, will show up at the beginning of opening the program. So everything that you've been working, all your recent files and recent projects will pop up here, so you can click on them and open them easier rather than like clicking open project and then finding them. That will be approximately the same thing, only open project takes a few more clicks. This is a little bit faster for you and stuff. So there's some other things here too that can help us out. There is like a learning area here, which you can find out about more things. We don't really need that since I'm hopefully teaching you right now. There's also a new project, open Premiere Rush project, and you might have some things down here, and I don't right now. I would need to make sure that my Adobe account is set for Enterprise, I think it is. You'll see some stuff on team projects, open team project or create a new team project. And those things are utilize the Adobe Creative Cloud a little bit in an interesting way. So your Adobe Premiere project file is a very, very small file. It's just a bunch of metadata that points things in the directions of videos. That doesn't make a ton of sense, but I think you'll get it as we go along. So you have a bunch of videos that you've cut up on your timeline, and all Premiere Pro project file is doing is saying like, hey, here's the video. It's located on this hard drive under this file, and we want it from a minute in a second to a minute and 13 seconds. That's what we're putting on the timeline, and it goes in this order. So all that information usually is makes for a very small file. You can build up your Premiere Pro project files into bigger projects by adding lots of like graphics and things that exist inside the program only. So if you create some text in here and stuff, that doesn't exist anywhere other than the Premiere Pro project file. But even then, it's going to be in the megabytes. It's not going to get into gigabytes unless you're doing something really, really extensive. I haven't had any projects that have gone into the gigabytes. But because it's such a small file, that can be saved on the cloud easily and then transferred person to person pretty easily too. So they've created team projects that allow you to work simultaneously on the same project as someone else. So as you do updates on your project, you can click a button and it will send off to everyone else who has access to the project. And then they can see a live update in their version. So if you make edits and stuff, you can work on, say, scenes 1 through 10 of a project, and someone else can work on scenes 11 through 20. And you can both be working on it simultaneously and sending each other live updates. A third person can be working on titles and stuff and can send a live update, and then you can drop those titles directly onto your scene number 1 or scene number 20 if it's end credits and stuff. So it is pretty interesting and useful. We will not cover team projects in this course, but it's important that you at least know what that is if you want to utilize that in the future. This other thing here that we also won't be covering in the course, but I'll let you at least know about it. Open Premiere Rush project. So Premiere Rush is an app for Android and iPhone, and this app allows you to use your cell phone video and cut that together in a very basic kind of way. It allows you to cut and add music and do very simple things, but it doesn't really allow you to, say, like rotoscope or do extensive titling. All of those things are more reserved for the actual full version of Adobe Premiere. So if you have Premiere Pro Rush, you can work with your cell phone videos. You can cut them up, and then you can send them into Adobe Premiere, and then utilize Premiere for the plethora of extra functions that it has over Premiere Pro Rush. Or Premiere Rush. I guess this is Premiere Pro, that's Premiere Rush. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and click on the New Project button here, and we are going to create a new project. For me, I'm just going to call it Test because I'm just showing you the layout of Premiere. I'm not doing too much work in here. I'm going to put it in a specific location that I can at least find, and something that is easily findable and somewhat organized. So for me, I'm just going to put it on the desktop, and I highly recommend that you don't do that. My desktop is like totally clean right now, and I just throw everything away. My desktop kind of works as my the area where I'm working on things currently, and then I toss those things. Anything that's temporary I throw on my desktop. But these things can build up a pretty significant number of files. So you do have the Premiere Pro project file that's called Test here, but you also have a bunch of files that get associated with that Premiere Pro project file. And they'll all be on the desktop, and it can get a little bit cluttered that way and stuff. So make sure that you create your own file here that you can kind of work with and then potentially throw away if you need to, or save. and it won't clutter anything up. Okay, so let's go down the list here and explain what these things are. There's a renderer here, and I have two options. You might not have the same options. So I have CUDA acceleration, and I have software only. So the idea here is if you have a video card or a graphics card on your PC or Mac that is CUDA enabled, it will allow Premiere to work quicker. It wouldn't lag as much. In theory, it plays your video back better than software only. If you only have software only, that's fine. You can select that on. The program will still work. It just might not work quite as fast as it would with the CUDA enabled processor. Okay, under video, we have display format here, and almost always we're going to select time code. So time code would display on your timeline as your video plays forward. It would display minutes, seconds, and frames, and then potentially hours if you go that far. I haven't gone past hours. It might display days, but I've never made a video quite that long. There are feet and frames, 16 millimeter, feet and frames, 35 millimeter, and then frames here. And each of these is an option for you, but I don't anticipate you would use them very often. Feet and frames refers to actual film. So like you have physical film and footage of that film. So not footage in the abstract sense that we think of footage, but literal feet of film. And you can have a display that says how many feet you've run through. It's not super intuitive unless you've worked with film like your entire life. And then there's frames down here too. And timecode does have frames. It runs, say, if you have a 24 frames per second project, you have frames 1 through 23, and then once you hit that 24th frame, then you are at 1 second. So timecode does display frames to an extent. It displays the frames between each second, but frames would display only frames. So once you hit 24 frames in a 24 frames per second project, it would just roll over to 25 and onward. So you would just have a number that escalates to infinity with frames. Now, why I recommend timecode over frames is that you can very easily tell how long your video is going to be. So if you are trying to aim for your videos being under 1 hour in length, you don't have to do any kind of math in your head, taking the total frame number divided by 24 to see how many minutes how many seconds you have, and then doing more math to find out how many minutes and hours you have. So this is good for people that aren't super adept at math, which is me. After that, we have audio here. We have display format. Again, it's going to be how your audio is displayed in the program as either audio samples or milliseconds. And if you are primarily working with audio in the program, then maybe milliseconds make sense to you. If you've worked in other what are called DAWs, if you edit audio specifically, you should be used to seeing milliseconds. So audio is broken down into seconds and milliseconds. The only issue with that is Premiere is like primarily a video editor. It is a non-linear editor in NLE. If you want your audio to be directly associated with your videos, then audio samples is the way to go. So audio doesn't have frames, but if we use that audio samples thing, then it kind of treats it as though the audio would have frames, like it's broken down the same way as our video. So let's go ahead and keep audio samples on there. And then capture format, this probably doesn't matter at all to you, but maybe it's important to at least mention. Capture format is talking about or is referencing the video capture. So if you have a tape if you have a camcorder that records to tape and you're going to capture that onto your hard drive, it wants to know what your setting should be. So you have two options here, DV or HDV. So you might not have even known this, but there were some tapes out there that were HD. They were, I think, 1080i or maybe even 720p. It's been a little while since I've had tapes and stuff, but if your project happens to be using mini DV tapes or the HD versions of those things, you want to be able to say, hey, it's this kind of tape. That way the computer understands what it's actually kind of capturing and stuff. So if we jump over one tab here from General to Scratch Disks, we'll see all of this interesting, fun stuff that you might not know what it is yet. So we have captured video and captured audio, and that is referring exactly to what I was just talking about. If you are capturing video from a tape, where is it going to be located? And I think by default, since I made my program default just like yours, by default, these are all going to be stored in the same place as the project file. So for me, it's all going to go on the desktop, and for you, it's going to go on whatever folder you've created for this project. And this is a good way to work, but if you want to save it anywhere else, you can go, hey, I want to make sure my captured video is going someplace else. It's going to a custom place, and then we can browse and find a good place to store that. For me, it's going to make sense to store everything same as project, and if you just quick OK through this whole new project window, that's where it's going to end up going, just so you know. This stuff is kind of stored in the program too, so if you do decide to move things in a different place on your hard drive for just your scratch disk area, or maybe your video previews or something, you had something specific for one project, it might retain that for your next project too. So you want to make sure that everything says same as project before you press OK. So captured video, captured audio, video previews, and audio previews. So these aren't like going to take the raw video and raw audio and move things over for you. That's actually on the next tab, this adjust settings here. Instead, the video and audio need to be conformed for the program so that you can hear it properly. So as you bring in a whole bunch of footage or a whole bunch of audio, you'll see that the program takes a minute to generate peak files for audio and stuff. So all of that is going to be stored as metadata files. They're fairly small, and they're going to be put right next to your project file. Project autosave. This is a really important one, right? So if we are working along in Premiere and we have some kind of catastrophic crash, we didn't save our project will autosave sporadically as we're working, and we can at least come back to some of the work that we had already done. So we want to make sure that we know where our project autosave is. We can access that rather than the original Premiere Pro project file if we do have a crash like that. Our library downloads, so we'll get into libraries a little bit later. That's going to be stored someplace too. And your motion graphics templates, that's going to be saved in the same place too if you're going to work with some graphic templates. We'll get into that in later lessons for sure. Ingest settings here. You can check mark on ingest, and then you have some options here. You can copy, transcode, create proxies, or copy and create proxies. And the whole idea here is that if you would like to take all your footage from an external hard drive and move it all over into a file with your project file, or right next to your project file, so everything's in the same kind of place. And this could really come in handy if, say, you have 5 external hard drives and you're pulling footage from all of them, just a couple of things from each of them, and you're worried about like, oh, do I have to plug in all 5 of these, or which of my 5 hard drives do I need to plug in for my project to work properly? Then maybe you do want to ingest everything that you import into the project over to a folder that you've chosen, or the folder next to your project file. Transcoding, that's going to take all of the footage that all of the raw footage that you have, and then create a new versions of that raw footage that might be lower resolution. It might be lower bit rate, so that you can work with them maybe a little bit easier. Maybe you're working with like the raw camera, or red raw footage. The red camera is raw footage, and you want to kind of make that something a little bit easier to work on, say for your laptop, so it's not super stressed and stuff. And you don't need it to export as like a super high quality video. You're just going out to YouTube or something like that. Then maybe transcoding makes sense to you, or for you for that project. Creating proxies, on the other hand, is kind of similar, but let's say a similar scenario. So you're working with the red camera. Your laptop won't be able to handle the footage very well, and you want to be able to edit it, but you want to retain all of the high quality footage. Like when you export it, you want that high quality footage. You don't want a dumbed down version of it from, say, transcoding your footage. You can create proxies instead, and the idea here is that you have both the very high quality raw footage, and you have a low resolution version of that footage that you can then edit, color grade, do all your effects work on and stuff. And then when you export it, you can actually reference the high quality footage, so that your export is of a high quality as well. So you can create proxies and stuff as you import, or you know what we can do, we can create proxies in our project and stuff already. So that's what I would recommend if you're working along here. But that's what the ingest properties do. I'm just going to check mark that off for now, because I know that I don't really want to move anything from one hard drive onto another. It might just take some time that is not needed. And you know, if I want to create proxies, I can always do that inside the project once we've begun. So that's everything on the new project window. We'll press OK here. I'm going to overwrite because I already created something called test on my desktop. And then I'm going to actually get into the program here. Here is the user interface for Adobe Premiere 2020. So you see a whole bunch of windows in here. You see a learning window, a source window, you might presume, but it's a source monitor. You see a project window, a timeline, and a program window, but that's also a monitor here. You just can't tell because there's no video in it yet. So each of these things aren't really windows, they are actually panels. If you want them to become windows, you can jump them out into windows separately and then kind of move them all over the place. But if I click and drag, you can see that I can maybe take my project window and move it over to the left side of my screen here. It works as a panel. I'm just going to move that back so everything looks the same for you guys. But all of this stuff is customizable, but at the same time, they know that you want to customize it probably in specific ways for specific modes of working. And that's what this stuff is right up here. These are all workspaces. So there's a learning tab here. So if you are new to Premiere Pro and you want to look at how to do certain things, there are some videos over on the left side here, which could be good for supplemental learning for this course. If I go over something too quickly, maybe it's over here in the learning videos. So learning is one thing, assembly is another. So this is intended for you to put your project together. So see how big the project window is here. That's where we import all of our footage and organize it and stuff. So it helps to have a nice big panel for the project window. as you're doing assembly stuff. So you're going to organize, and then you can do some like rough cutting in here as well. The editing tab, here's where you do more fine-tuned editing work. So now you have a source monitor, and the idea here is that you have imported footage. You can double click it and it will open up in the source monitor. You can set in and out points for your clip, move it into the timeline, and then cut everything a little bit more precisely in the timeline, or add more stuff to make your full video. From here, there's a color tab, and the idea is that you would color grade all of your footage here. So that's the, or you could color correct here as well. Color grading is the creative manipulation of color of your video. And then color correction is maybe like adjusting the white balance in post-production. So if if you're doing a documentary and you want everything to look normal, no major creative color choices to it, you might do some color correction. You might white balance if maybe something was amiss in the camera settings. From here you see effects, and my effects tab looks a little bit funky. There, I think it's fixed. Okay, so my effects workspace might not look exactly like yours. I did adjust these things, and even though I reset all my settings in Premiere, it looks like it was still set for my particular settings for effects. So the effects tab here is for you to add effects to your videos, go figure. So you have an effects window, which again, my stuff looks a little bit funky, but here's my effects tab and the effects panel, and you can find various effects that exist in Premiere, or maybe you've downloaded like third-party presets and stuff, and you can add those to video clips. You can add those to audio clips, and adjust those things in an effects control panel. Chances are yours looks just a little bit different than mine. If it does, no big deal. We can get away with this. Okay. From here we have an audio tab, and the audio tab is set up for you to do your audio mixing in Premiere. So we have a track mixer here. Because we have nothing on our timeline right now, we don't see anything displayed, but it's a whole bunch of sliders. It looks a lot like if you've ever seen like an analog audio mixer with all of those sliders to turn things up or down. That exists in Premiere, and we will get to that eventually too. From here, there is a graphics workspace, and that's for all of your graphics work. Mostly you're going to do things like add titles or end credits and stuff like that. That would this essential graphics tab over here is really important for that. You can always pull up any of this stuff in other workspaces too, but it might be easier for you just to click this button and get what you need there. There are some other workspaces, libraries. So if you're working with library items, you would go there. And then there are these two little right arrows here, and it shows you some extra workspaces. So if you create new workspaces, they will appear here. There are a couple here: meta logging if you're going to do metadata stuff, all panels if you've made some kind of catastrophic error with your workspaces, or you can't find something that you normally work with. All panels will load up absolutely everything all at once. It'll actually take a minute to load my all panels here. All right, so there it is. Now I see every panel that exists inside Premiere. So if I want to like see what exists here, that's an option for me if I have a lot of patience. There's also edit workspaces over here too. So if you want to change, say, the order of your workspaces, so if hey, I will definitely do assembly and then editing, that's normal for me, but maybe I do my effects before my color grading, and I do my audio before my color grading too. I'm going to do my color last, and my graphics before that too. I can move that stuff around, no problems there. If I really like that meta logging and I want that to be visible at the top here without pressing the over arrows, I can certainly do that too. If you make any of these changes and then you press OK, they will appear in the workspace area on the program. Now, if you don't see this for some reason, or you don't see anything that you prefer working with, you can always add panels to any of these workspaces by going up to Window, and then you can see each item for panels here. So if I wanted to add capture, right, like I'm working with tape and stuff, to my assembly area, that makes a lot of sense to have that here. Here's my capture window, and it shows me what's being captured here, and I can set in and out points. I can play my video back if I have something connected here, and Adobe can recognize that camera. Now, if I want that not to be a window, if I want that to be a panel, I can click and drag the text for the panel and then move it wherever I'd like it to go. I can put it on the same panel as other items, and then it will be like a tab that I can click on, and then it will open up. I don't need that though, so I'm just going to get rid of it. All right. So I'm going to start in the assembly workspace because it's kind of simplified for us. We can see some panels here that are that appear in absolutely everything, that all of these other workspaces and stuff. So as you move along, they're only going to add things to you from the assembly workspace. So the project window is where I import my footage. So I'm going to go ahead and import some footage. There is a bunch of different ways that you can import footage. There's 3 off the top of my head. So we can go to File, Import, and then we can find our footage here. We're going to head on over to Premiere Course Items, and I'm just going to import a couple of videos from the chess scene. I'm just going to take the first 5. Okay. Now Premiere will import that footage, and you'll see it displayed like this in your project window. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Click File, go to Import there. There is also a shortcut for this, Control-I, which is the way that I generally do it since I work in Premiere very often. That's one way to work. Same window, just maybe moves a little bit quicker. Now there's another couple of ways to do things too. If I right click, I can go to Import, and it'll be the same exact thing again. And if I just double click in the project window and empty space in the project window, it'll be the same thing as well. So maybe the slowest way to go about doing things is File, Import, and then any of the other ways is going to be very quick to work. Once you import your footage, you should get these nice little thumbnails. And if I hover over any of the videos, I can just move my mouse left to right or right to left, and we can see that video kind of play back at the speed that I'm moving my mouse. So this thumbnail view is kind of helpful to see what you have initially in your footage there. But if you want to see like more detailed analysis of the actual video, which is usually how I work, you can see right down here at the bottom of your project window, you have some options. You have list view and icon view. If we click list view, we'll just see the name of the videos, and we'll see some metadata items. And there are a lot of them at default. Here's your project window, here's your files, here are labels, frame rate, media start, media end, media duration, video in point, video out point, all this crazy stuff. But you might not need all of these things. So if you want to customize this area in your project window, all you have to do is right click right where it says name up here, or anywhere on the metadata list area. We can click metadata display, and then you have options for all of these metadata items. So there's a ton of stuff in here. Dublin core is like the basic metadata that you see on maybe like an MP3 that you've downloaded, where it says, here is the artist name and the name of the song, right? And maybe there's like an icon for the album. So that's like a different kind of metadata, but you can see that inside Premiere. And then there's a bunch of stuff inside the Premiere Pro project metadata, which is what we are seeing right now. And almost everything is selected right now, but you probably don't need all of this stuff. So you see frame rate, you see all that stuff that we looked at before. But what we can do when we first customize our project is we can turn this off. It has a little minus here initially. If we toggle it on and then off and press OK, all of those metadata items will now disappear. And if we go back, we can then search for the things that we think are important. So if I search for frame rate, because I really want to know what frame rate my videos are, because maybe I'm working with several different frame rates and I want to make sure that they all conform properly, I might look for video info, which is a little bit misleading. All video info is the resolution and the pixel aspect ratio for your video. So, you know, like if you're working with mixed resolutions, you have some 720p footage and you have some 1080p footage. That's how you would adjust that. Virtually anything that would be important information about your videos are somewhere in here. There's one more thing that I think is really helpful for us though, and that is labels. And we can add a label here. So there are several labels here. We just want to make sure it's the Premiere Pro label. And then we can press OK, and all of those things that I thought were really important. I can now see that all of my video is 720p. We can see that they're all 24 frames per second. And then there's this little colored label over here. And that label is adjustable. If I right click and go to right click any of the clips that I have in here and go to label, there it is there. I can see that I can change the color here. So I can change it to all of these kind of weird color choices that Adobe has as presets. Rose, if I want my label to be pink like that, or lavender, or any of those colors there. So I can actually use this as color coding for my videos. So if I find that some videos should not really be used in my edit, but I don't want to delete them out of there, maybe there's something useful to them, I can label them in a way that as soon as I bring them onto my timeline, I can see that label, and I can see them in my project window as being something that maybe I should be cautious about, or, you know, maybe I label my stuff green as I've gone through all of the footage and made sure everything's okay. So if we're like watching each of these videos played back to make sure that there's no kinds of issues with them, we can label them as we have gotten through them, so we know which ones we've gotten through and which ones we haven't. These labels have a ton of applications, so whatever works for you works for you. I just want you to know that that they do exist. Now, if you are like me and you go, hey, these labels are not the colors that I would choose, I can understand that. If you want to change these things, we have to get a little bit deeper into the program. So if we go to Edit and then Preferences and then Labels, almost. All right, there it is. So now we have the preferences and we are under labels. We can change these colors here. So all of our violets, if we want to change that to maybe green, and we could just maybe call it green this time. Change that over. now all of our lavender color has turned green for us. And if we right click this one and go to label, we now have the option just to turn it green. So if you want to change those labels, if you do find that this would be really helpful for you in organizing your footage, it's certainly possible. Now, you don't have to work with this stuff if you are kind of new to the program. I can understand that you might like the icon view better, or you can flip back and forth. If you do use the icon view, you can always zoom in on that a little bit more. So if these icons are just too small for you to see, or to see some details that you'd like to see, you can kind of blow those things up. And in this like icon view, which by the way, we can click on and press spacebar. Spacebar means play in the program. Spacebar will play in any panel that has a play option. If we want to, we can actually work with these this icon view kind of like a source monitor, which we haven't learned too much about yet, but how about we learn about that source monitor? Okay, so if I want to do some work on this footage, so let's look at this one right here. I can double click any of my clips and it will open in my source monitor. In the source monitor, it will say what clip I'm looking at. So it's a source : and then 2.move. 2.move is the clip that I double clicked. And then I can play along and find, you see how like the camera is getting fixed before we actually start the scene? Okay, so the usable part of this starts right here. So I can set an in point, so that's where the video should start. And I can click this little button right here called Mark In, or I can press I on my keyboard for Mark In. Now I can scrub forward by taking this little playhead icon, that's that blue arrow on this ruler area of our source monitor, and I can click and drag that to move to play forward at the rate that I'd like, or I can just press the space bar and play back at regular speed and find when I want to end this clip for my edit. So maybe right after he sits down is a good place for me to cut, and I can refine this a little bit further when I get to my timeline, but I think that this is the good portion of the clip that I'm looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and press O for out. I can also click this button right here for mark out, and what I'd love to show you guys is this one little additional thing way back in the project window. You remember that? So if I'm now looking at my icon view, I can see this blue area underneath the thumbnail for the video, and that is my in and out point. But I can actually set in and out points on in my project window if I'm playing along in here and kind of looking at stuff. If I press I and then maybe I play forward a little bit more, if my computer doesn't crash, that's good. I can press O on my keyboard, and now I've created in and out points there. Pretty simple ways to work, and the big thing about Premiere is there's a million ways to do any one given task. And what's helpful about that is it's really intuitive. Whatever you think would work probably will work in the program. And what's not great about that is that if you have to know everything about the program, you might miss a few things. So something else that we can do in here. Okay, back to the source monitor. We can jump to in points and jump to out points. There are shortcuts for that. What is it? It is, if you hover over anything, you should be able to see the shortcut. Shift I. So Shift I and Shift O will jump you from in to out point if you want to see where you started and where you ended. Okay, if you have set in and out points and you just want to clear those things, you don't want to see those anymore, you can always just redo your endpoint. So if I made a mistake and I wanted my endpoint to actually be over here, I can set the endpoint just by pressing eye on my keyboard or this button. Also, if I'm on an in point or an out point, there will be a little icon over here. But if you want to clear the in points and out points, you want to just revert it back to a point where there were no in points and out points, we can just right click in the in to out point area, and then where you see clear in and out, you can do that. You can also clear just the in point or just the out point. Again, a million ways to do the same things. You can also go to in and go to out by right clicking and clicking those options. So there's your source monitor for you. The primary function here is for you to set in and out points. There are a couple of extra things. You can maybe export a frame if you want to do a screen grab really quickly, and you have options for insert and overwrite. How do you want to get your footage into the timeline? So my timeline has disappeared at some point while I was talking to you. Oh, there it is. There's my timeline. So if I wanted to insert this into my timeline or overwrite it into my timeline, I could do that by clicking those buttons. But first, I need to actually set up what's called a sequence. A sequence is the order of videos that you will then export into a final into your final video. So your edit will be exported from the sequence. That is the area where you do all of your work. That's where you put together your video. Okay, and we can make a new sequence in another plethora of ways. I think there might be more ways to create a new sequence than there are to import footage, and whichever way you want to work is just fine, but let me show you a bunch of different ways to do it. So we can take our clips here, and we can click and drag and drop them into an empty timeline, and it will create a brand new sequence, all conformed to the video that we brought in here. So let's say yeah, so our video here is 24 frames per second and 720p. Now our sequence will also be 24 frames per second and 720p. It will match. So that's one way to do things. Oh, it'll also have the same name as your clip, which actually could become a little bit troublesome as you keep working. So that's one way to do things. You can also create a sequence based on a clip by clicking and dragging and dropping on this thing that looks like a post-it note with a corner peeled up on it, the new items button down here, and that will do the same exact thing that we just did. So once again, it's conformed to the video that we click, dragged, and dropped. It has the same name as it. We can delete it just by pressing delete. That's what I did there. I can also drag and drop that onto the little delete icon down here and delete it from the project that way. Now, if I want to create one more way, sorry. We can right click any of our clips, and then we can go new sequence from clip, and it will once again do that same exact thing, conform to the video. And this is the way that most people work, honestly. If you see that all of your videos are the same frame rate and all of your video info is the same or the same resolution, right? It makes a whole lot of sense to auto-conform everything to the video. That way you don't make any mistakes there. So there is this other way to work too, though, and that is to create your sequence initially. And this makes a lot of sense maybe if you are creating things like with graphics and audio, not working so much with video that you've imported, or maybe you have a whole bunch of variable frame rates and resolutions. So to do something like that, there's a bunch of different ways. You can right-click in your project window, go to new item, and then sequence. You can also click on that new item button down here and go to sequence, or you can go to file, new, sequence, and all of these things are going to do the same exact thing for you. They're going to open the new sequence window where you can set up your presets. So there's a bunch of presets in here for all these different cameras, and it might be a little bit misleading. So like if I go to Red R3D and I grab, say, 1080p 16:9 23.976 sequence, you might think that you can only work with R3D files, but it's going to let you work with anything. It's just going to set your sequence settings to be 1080p 16:9 23.976. And if you want to adjust any of the settings here, they do exist here. So if you find out that you didn't want 1920 by 1080, instead you wanted some other resolution, you can just type those numbers in here. If you happen to have something like anamorphic footage and it doesn't have a square pixel aspect ratio, or old tape footage too might be in the same boat there, you can click here and adjust that stuff. So if you bring in your footage and you see that it's like really squished or really stretched, maybe that's what you need to do to kind of change things and stuff. And we'll cover that in a later lesson with this course. We can also adjust the tracks here, how many audio tracks exist in the project, which we can always do after the fact too. And should your master track be stereo, 5.1, multi-channel, or mono? In most cases, you're dealing with stereo work, and we'll leave it as stereo for now, but do know that it is an option for you to mix 5.1 surround sound in Adobe Premiere. Exporting 5.1 surround sound is a little bit more troublesome, but working with it isn't too hard so long as you have the hardware to make it work. You can also do mono, and a whole lot of audio people would say mix mono first, because some people are going to be listening through their phones, or like if for some reason someone's listening through what's it called, a Google Home, right? Like there's just one speaker in there, so mono is going to better replicate that. And if you have a lot of stereo work, 2 channels, right, left channel and right channel, and you can move between those things, we'll talk about that when we get into audio, then maybe those things won't translate over very well to mono. So but most of the time people are going to have stereo stuff. Televisions, laptops, headphones, all that stuff is stereo. So we're going to go ahead and stick with stereo here. We see track names. We can name these tracks, but we can also name these tracks later. You can also see pan and balance, right? So like if you want things to be more coming out through the left speaker more, we can do that early on, or we can do that afterwards. Again, afterwards makes a whole lot of sense for us. We can also name our sequence here. I'm going to call it test again. Hey, go figure. And then I'm going to press OK. And now we have a sequence. Now if I have my video over in my source monitor, here's source number 1, right? So I can see that my timeline has something on it. I can scrub forward and backwards, but there's nothing in my timeline yet, so I can't really work with it. But if I open something into my source monitor, maybe I set an in point, maybe I set an out point. I should definitely do those things. And then I want to bring those things into my timeline. I have options for insert and overwrite. There are hotkeys for these. It is comma and period. So insert will drop my video in there. And likewise, if I have my video open in my source monitor and I click overwrite, that will drop my video in there as well. The difference between those two things, which by the way my footage is 720p and a 1080p sequence, and maybe we can correct that really quickly. The difference between insert and overwrite, I can see those two clips now and I can scrub through spacebar, I can play them back. But the difference between those two buttons is insert will insert the video without disrupting anything really. It'll push video left and right from the insert point, and overwrite will just write over the video that already exists there. So I have 2 of the same clips here, and now if I open up video clip 2, okay, and I have an in and out point already, I'm going to drop an insert on this, and you'll watch on my timeline as everything kind of bumps over as that comes in. And then I'm just going to press Control Z and undo that real quick and show you overwrite. Oops. Gotta open the video first. Click overwrite, and now it just overwrites everything that is after the playhead there. So both of these can come in handy for you and stuff. Another option to get your videos in there, though, if you have in and out points set already, click drag and drop it straight from your project window, and that'll work. And then also from your source monitor, we can click drag and drop. There is no audio associated with it, but here's some video. We can drag video only. If it had audio, we could drag audio only into one of our audio tracks here. And if we want to click and drag and drop both things, if there were both things, we can just grab from the middle of the frame, the source monitor here, click, drag, and drop it. So those are ways that people generally get their video from their source monitor into their timeline. And as soon as I start playing back from my timeline, you'll see that my panel over here has switched over to the program monitor, and the program monitor just displays whatever's on your timeline, and whatever video, like when you export, you get an export of what the program monitor shows you. Okay, so let me fix this little bit of an issue with having these big black bars here. So we created our own sequence from scratch, not conform to the video that we had before, but it was incorrect in what we wanted to do. So it's pretty close with the frame rate. It's not going to really give us an issue there, but the video info here displays that our sequence settings are 1920 by 1080, but our footage is 1280 by 720, hence the big black rectangles. So 1280 by 720 is what I want to change this to. Say I had a really good edit here and I didn't want to lose that edit. Here's how I'm going to change that. If I right click my sequence and go to sequence settings, I'm right back where I was with the create new sequence area. So we can change this from video size 1920 by 1080 to 1280 by 720. And we see over here this 1 in parentheses, 1.0 in parentheses. That's that pixel aspect ratio. So that was correct, but the other things were not. So we'll go ahead and press OK there. And it gives you this little message. It's a warning message that says it could it's going to erase all the preview files that were moved over, and it has to create new preview files. Preview files are created so quickly that it's not going to matter at all for us. Once we press OK there, we're going to see that our footage now works pretty darn well and fits out our space. So that'll be everything for lesson number 1. We covered how to install the program, how to open the program, how to reset our settings if we've already if we've messed with our settings in previous versions of Premiere, importing panels, all that good stuff. All covered in lesson number 1. We will go over the timeline and tools in lesson number 2.